We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are talking about the looming deadline on the pistol stabilizing brace. We're going to be talking about the different methods of compliance, some NFA Trust issues, kind of issue with some multiple Form 1s floating around. Make sure you avoid that mistake and answer the question, can you replace the brace with a stock? And finally, what are the courts going to do when it comes to this rule actually going into effect? But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is brought to you by our friends over at Acre Gold. You know how the price of gold has been all over the place lately? Well, now there's a new way to buy gold through a company called Acre. Acre lets you subscribe to gold bars for as little as $30 a month. You pay each month, and once your gold stash reaches the price of their gold bars, they discreetly ship Acre Gold to your house. And just recently, Acre has introduced a new $100 a month subscription for a 5-gram gold bar. Acre lets you invest in the physical gold without coming out of pocket all at once. Acre Gold is also a fantastic hedge against inflation, which we've already seen with gas, lumber, and food prices. So check them out at getacregold.com, linked in the description below. Today, what we're talking about is the factoring criteria for firearms with attached stabilizing braces. Now, this was a final rule published in the Federal Register on January the 31st, 2023. And if you have your head buried in the sand, I'm going to give a quick overview of the rule. What it essentially says is it's going to start looking at these AR pistols, or think about what looks like a traditional rifle attached with a stabilizing brace. And the rule is going to treat these things like short-barreled rifles going forward. Now, we've had a lot of questions about, can I just simply remove the brace? Can I change this thing into a traditional rifle? Can I register it as a short-barreled rifle? And the answer to all those questions are yes, but there's a little bit to it. So let's talk about each of those things. Now, what the ATF is primarily looking at, and you saw all these different schedules floating around about, adding all these different numbers together to determine whether or not your rifle was a short-barreled rifle or not. They decided not to go with that sheet. What they're simply looking at is there a rearward attachment to the firearm, and does it create a surface area such that it could be shouldered? Now, what a lot of folks are worried about is, hey, what if I have the buffer tube or receiver extension? That has a surface area. Would that qualify? The answer to that is no. The ATF specifically says that they are not going to be looking at our standard 6.5-inch receiver extension buffer tube. So long as it's necessary for the cycle of operations, that's not going to be counted against you. So going to our primary methods of compliance with this final rule, the first one is simply remove the brace. Now, this might be in your best interest if you think this rule might get struck down. Simply removing the brace would be compliant with federal law. Now, compare this to other NFA items. Think about machine guns, where the possession of a machine gun part in itself is a machine gun. Think bump stocks. If you had a bump stock, that was a machine gun. That's illegal. Now, we don't do the same thing here with pistol braces. And so simply removing the brace, keeping these things separated, we don't want to show any intent to reassemble these things. But keeping those things separate, that could comply. Now, the second method of compliance is converting the AR pistol into a traditional rifle. So that would be putting on a barrel with length of 16 inches or greater, overall length greater than 26 inches. That would comply with the rule as well. So if you wanted to get a longer barrel, traditional stock, slap those things on your lower, that would be another way to comply with the rule. Now, downside of that might cost you a little bit of money, right? Because you got to buy some new parts. Now, the third one that most folks are talking about is registering their firearm with the ATF via Form 1. So that's the form that you would fill out to basically build or manufacture a short-barreled rifle or NFA item in general. Now, there's two of these forms floating around, kind of one that predates this rule, and you got to be careful because if you are filling out that form, you might be on the hook for paying a tax stamp that, maybe you aren't necessarily responsible for. But if you access the Form 1 through the ATF's website, regarding the final rule on stabilizing braces, that will be the correct one. That'll make sure that if you are eligible to have a waiver on the $200 tax stamp, then you could get that. Now, waiver on the $200 tax stamp, what am I talking about? Well, as part of this rule, the ATF granted an amnesty and compliance period where they said for the period between January the 31st, 2023 and May the 31st, 2023, when the rule goes into effect, they're going to be waiving the $200 tax stamp. Now, how does this work? Well, if you're an individual, when you're applying via Form 1 on that website, you have an option where you would have the tax stamp waived. Now, here's the rub, and this is a question we've gotten from several folks is, can a trust have that $200 tax stamp waived? Let's say I decide to go with this second option. I'm going to register my brace pistol now, soon to be short barrel rifle. Um, could I do that with a trust? Could the trust waive the $200? The answer to that is yes. However, the item had to have been in that trust prior to the final rule being published. So prior to January the 31st, 2023. And so what we see is a lot of folks, they did not have those items in their trust. And so if they were going to move those things over, after that date, they would not get the benefit of the waiver of the $200 tax stamp. Now, if it was in there before, yes, you would be completely eligible. And a lot of folks ask, should we put these things in an NFA trust? We have an entire video on those. We'll link that down in the description below. But essentially, a trust is, can one person possess the item or can multiple people possess the item? If you're wanting multiple people to possess the item, you might look into a trust. But these trusts, most of them are not going to get the benefit of this $200 tax waiver because the items were not in there prior to the rule going into effect. All right, so to summarize, taking the brace off, viable option. Converting it into a traditional rifle, viable option. Registering under the National Firearms Act. Now, as you've heard, just to be crystal clear, that deadline is May the 31st, 2023. That's when that amnesty and compliance period would end. Now, if you decide to, hey, I'm just going to take this brace off, could you later register it as a short-barreled rifle? Yes, you could. But just keep in mind, if it's after that date, you will be on the hook. You will not get that $200 tax stamp fee waived, and so you'll be on the hook. So can I, let's say I've submitted my Form 1, I've gotten authorization from the ATF, can I swap out this brace with a traditional stock? And the answer is yes. However, there's a little bit to it. So when you fill out your Form 1, you're going to provide the characteristics of the firearm to the ATF. When switching out the stock, if it doesn't change the overall length, then you could just switch it out, no problem. However, if the characteristics of the firearm change such that the length maybe is modified slightly, you would need to notify the ATF in the change in the description of the National Firearms Act item, so the short-barreled rifle in this case. So there's a way to do it. A question that we've seen floating around is, are there kind of two classes of short-barreled rifles out there, braced pistols, and then what we would think of as a traditional short-barreled rifle? The answer is no. There's one class of short-barreled rifle, and that means that you would be able to switch out the brace with a traditional stock, meeting all those other criteria. Now, what are the courts going to do? Now, this is where we have to put on our speculating hats and think about how they are going to handle this, because really what we see the ATF doing in this case is a reinterpretation of the law that was already on the books, as opposed to bump stocks, where they crammed a bunch of additional information into the Code of Federal Regulations, different than that of what Congress provided. So this one, I think, is going to be a closer fight. I would say that the chances of this rule being overturned are high, though, because of the common use test set out in Heller and reaffirmed in the Bruin New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, by which we judge these Second Amendment infringements. So I do think that there is the greater weight, and I think it will take some time, but I do think that when all this is said and done, we do believe that the final rule is going to get struck down, but it is going to take some time, and these things take a long time to get litigated. I mean, we just are seeing some finality kind of to the bump stock saga, and it's been several years. So you got to look out for that stuff. But I'm sure we're going to have to revisit this subject again before the deadline goes into effect. I mean, that's when we'll start seeing lots of court challenges from all of our friends in the gun community. But these were the primary questions that we received from you in the comment sections on previous videos. And so we hope that helped. If you have additional questions, though, make sure to post them in the comment section down below. We'll try to address those before this rule goes into effect, but we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. Don't forget to leave those questions and comments, and until next time, we're the Armed Deterrents.